afternoon here in Seattle, Washington, also acknowledged as the unceded ancestral lands of the Duwamish people, and I'm also glad that folks are joining us online. So welcome. My name is Annalisa Torres, and I'm a member of Radical Women, as well as its Comrades of Color Caucus, a joint caucus with its sister organization, the Freedom Socialist Party, and I'll be the chair for tonight's event. So what we have planned tonight is we'll hear why we celebrate International Women's Day. There'll be a reading of an Iranian poem, and then we'll hear from our three featured guests here at front, and then how you can contribute. Then, for folks in person, we'll be able to have some discussion, and then after the discussion, we'll close with singing Bread and Roses. And I hope you could stay, because afterwards, as getting to know the rest of us here. So, although that's later on, I do want to let you know that the bar and drinks are available throughout the program. And the bartender's waiting. So before we start, I do want to invite you back here to New Freeway Hall to Radical Women's next meeting on Thursday, March 26th at 7 p.m. And there are little flyers. March 16th, excuse me. And there are flyers on your table. So why we celebrate International Women's Day? Radical Women, as a revolutionary socialist feminist organization, celebrates International Women's Day because of its roots in the struggle for women's equality and justice. The international leadership of women have led to changes, and they continue to be the driving force in resistance throughout the world. In 1908, 15,000 women marched through New York City demanding shorter hours, better pay, voting rights, and an end to child labor. They adopted the slogan, Bread and Roses, which bread symbolizing economic security and with roses symbolizing the best quality of life. Clara Zetkin, a German socialist who was inspired by the struggle of the women workers in the United States, she made a proposal to the International Socialist Women's Conference that an International Day of Solidarity be designated to honor and commemorate the valiant struggles by and for women worldwide, and it was accepted. And Radical Women continues this tradition and occasion today. In addition to International Women's Day, today is also the centennial birthday of one of our founders, Claire Fraser. And if you look to the side here, there is a picture of her. And she strongly believed in all of the working class who deserves the roses that the women garment workers fought for, and more. And I wanted to quote her. And I know we sound completely different, but in a quote she says, "It's time for swift, striking gender insurgency. Time for women guerrillas, 21st century Amazons, mad shrieks of protest, and careful mobilization of political battalions." She led by example, trained and mentored many activists into challenging the capitalist profit system, and in celebration of her, we have this display on the piano with some of her writing lessons, and there's also more in the bookstore, so do invite you to check her out, as she was very special to us and the organization, and I would want to say has really made an impact on socialist feminism. But as you know, the fight is far from over. Sisters and working class siblings of all races and nations continue to be on the forefront of the struggles against capitalism and all its ills. This is certainly true today in the Middle East and Central Asia. We see that when the U.S. abandoned its imperial aims in Afghanistan and pulled out hastily by September 2021, the Taliban has lived up to every expectation of brutality and repression, especially against women and girls. In Iran, girls and women, queer individuals, and other oppressed peoples rose up last fall in protest of the morality police and all forms of repression. And so it's an honor today to have local Iranian and Afghanistani activists here tonight to share their knowledge and experience and describe the fight for life and freedom. We'll also discuss how folks here in the U.S. have been in solidarity and how to continue to build for lasting change. So to kick things off, I'd like to invite Hannah Thomas Garner to the front. She is a part of the Puget Sound Mobilization for Reproductive Justice and the Director of Advocacy and Mission Advancement for the Northwest Animal Rights Network. So, she'll be reading a poem by an Iranian woman, and we have copies in Farsi if you are interested.
Hi everyone. This poem is by Irfan Nahari, a woman living in Iran, and it is a dialogue between a judge and a protester, or somebody who has been arrested for something similar. Confess! Honorable Judge, I have set the trash can on fire. The garbage was left in the bin centuries ago. Remnants of misconceptions, rotten thoughts, smelly beliefs, house smells, street smells, city smells. We did not have a place to bury the garbage. We did not know how to recycle it, so I set it on fire. Your accusations are more than this. Yes, Honorable Judge, I have broken glass, too. The glass that was drawn around my life, it separated me from the world. And separated me from the time. I broke down and touched the modern world. I broke into the modern century. Your case is heavy. These are the 2 items that you have said. Confess the rest. Your Honor, I have always thrown many stones. Of course, only in people's dreams, not to the people themselves. They were crying in their sleep. I wanted to wake them up from having nightmares. You had no right to do so. What did you do? You probably chanted, too. No, Your Honor. I only had insights about what needed to be chanted, but did not chant. We learned from the old archives that your family also has a history. Yes, Honorable Judge. My father was a rebel. My mother was a rebel. My dad harvested wheat. My mom picked apples. They were both fired. Both of them are exiles. I myself was born in exile. End the trial. The accused pleaded guilty to all charges upon confession. Accused, are you male or female? I am human, Honorable Judge. This ends the meeting. Take him to sentencing. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dorna Abdolazimi. Dorna grew up in Iran and came to Seattle in 2019 for her PhD in computer science. She was actively engaged with the 2009 Green Movement as a teenager, and after the 2019 protests in Iran, she started writing and translating for some collectives focused on international labor solidarity. Since the beginning of the Women Life Freedom Uprising, she's written for alternative independent media, as well as organizing actions and events with Feminists for Jina in Seattle, with the goal of amplifying revolutionary feminist voices in Iran that are often marginalized by right-wingers in the diaspora. Please help me welcome Dorna.
First, I want to thank Radical Women and everyone else who made this happen. So I want to start with a translation of part of a letter written by Jina, a Kurdish woman who has been sentenced to life imprisonment, and she's been in prison since 16 years ago. And she wrote this letter from prison for last year's International Women's Day. To the oppressors, you have witnessed and will continue to witness that you cannot prevent us, women, from demanding the rights that any human being deserves by massacring us, torturing us, and incarcerating us. When freedom is woven into a woman's very being, there is no amount of force that can bring her to her knees. And to courageous and selfless women, speak up the words that even fire would not dare utter. I do not wish death even on our oppressors, but let us come together to struggle against them until we have forced them out of our motherland, doing justice to the memory of the women who lost their lives fighting for freedom and equality. I am Zainab, a Kurdish woman who has witnessed hundreds of atrocities of the Islamic Republic in prison, as well as slander, insults, torture, and worst of all, the executions of tens of my Saudis. Is there any pain worse than this? Now these oppressors will want me to express remorse. How is it possible for me, who has seen with my own eyes this amount of cruelty, to show remorse? Rest assured that every time I am brutalized and tortured by the oppressors, I become even more defiant and resistant. So I started with Zainab's letter because I wanted us to be connected to the radicalism that made the woman left freedom uprising happen. So in the rest of this, first I'm going to talk very briefly about the background of the current feminist movement in Iran and also where it's headed. And then I want to initiate a conversation about the possible links between the feminist movement in Iran and the rest of the world. And also I want to mention that since I'm a member of the Persian ethnic group from the central part of Iran, and my knowledge is very limited about Kurdistan and other regions that are like the homeland of mostly non-Persian groups. I'm going to mostly talk about the feminist movement in the central part. So I could, of course, can trace back the origins of this uprising to more than 100 years ago, but I want to say a few words about the more recent background, starting from the 1979 revolution. Although the role of the clergy and the Khomeinists could ultimately be seen and understood as counter-revolution in some sense, we have to remember that they did not consolidate power only through a use of force and repression, but also by relying on popular Islamist discourse that had thrived during the 60s and the 70s, as well as power structures and relations of domination that existed within society. Especially patriarchal power and national oppression, which was itself historically established and maintained through appealing to patriarchal power. So in 1979, for many reasons, including the harsh repression against all forms of independent feminist organizing during the Pahlavi period, a feminist critique of the role of patriarchy in the formation of the oppressive Islamic Republic did not have a strong presence among most politically organized groups based in the central parts of Iran, and in particular the leftist ones. many of these groups saw the idea of mandatory hijab as a restriction of just one aspect of women's rights and freedoms, rather than an essential part of like a broader campaign to consolidate oppressive power by appealing to, in some ways, bribing those who had a form of patriarchal power over some others in their family, neighborhood, workplace, and promising them to enforce this power on their behalf. But despite this, there were many women and girls who weren't part of any of the larger politically organized groups who responded to these developments much more radically. On March 8, 1980, many women and girls took to the streets in many cities in Iran, and this series of protests that continued for 6 days was one of the first mass actions to formulate itself as against the Islamists. And as a result of these protests, women were able to deter the mandatory hijab law for at least 2 years. But in the central parts of Iran, the protests couldn't take a more organized form and persist longer under the repression and lack of support from other sectors of society. In Kurdistan, the movement was more organized, but the state could afford to repress people in Kurdistan much more heavily due to the deeply rooted political marginalization of the peripheries in Iran. And in the past few decades, women and queer people have defied patriarchal power every day in their private, public life. They have organized protests and engaged in many other forms of direct action, despite facing violence and arrest. So feminist resistance has always been happening in Iran. So what has changed? Of course, this question is very broad and can be discussed from different angles in detail, but it might be easier to identify when and how the new revolutionary period manifested itself. And the first major turning point was in 2017, when it became more apparent that the era of reformist movement and the faith in electoral politics had ended. And for many years, the Reformist Party campaigned for marginal, less restrictive hijab policies, and more broadly, they had this mindset that political change happens when pressure from below results in reform from above. And this idea was dominant in the politics of central parts of Iran. But in 2017, a series of protests took place that posed themselves against electoral politics. And in the same year, a woman named Vidamova had stood on a high surface on Enqilab Street in the heart of Tehran, and tied a white headscarf to a stick and waved it to the crowd as a flag until she was arrested. And in following days, many women repeated her action. And so later in 2019, the mass killing of the protesters after the state tripled the price of gas further radicalized the dominant political discourse. And finally, last September, the mayor of Jina, also known as Masa, that's her name was Jina. Jina Amini, the Kurdish woman who became the symbol of our fight, facilitated the formation of a revolutionary uprising that many had been waiting for. What essentially made this possible was, on the one hand, the Kurdish feminist discourse that has spread throughout Kurdistan, always crossing nation-state borders. And on the other hand, the readiness of the radical feminist groups in other parts of the country to help it spread and become a larger uprising. And this helped activate the revolutionary potential that women have as a large group that has always been excluded and oppressed. And because the uprising has been rooted in the geographical, political, and economic periphery in Kurdistan, its feminism is inherently and organically intersectional. And as a lot of you know, the state has enacted extreme violence against the people, but the uprising has continued with some ups and downs until today. But gradually it has become more apparent that the revolutionary forces need to get more organized in neighborhoods of larger cities, especially in Tehran, as well as in their workplaces. And the problem has many facets. First of all, under decades of harsh repression against independent organizing, many people have become politically isolated, and there's a lack of organizing culture and knowledge in many regions. And at the same time, in a metropolis like Tehran, many people no longer have a local community based in their neighborhoods, which makes it really hard to start organizing locally. So, while some regions like Kurdistan are much more organized, Tehran and many other cities need to increase their level of organization to be able to back up the Kurdish revolutionaries. And labor organizing has also been hurt both as a result of decades of direct, violent repression, including literally killing, striking workers with guns, and the way neoliberalism has reshaped the general economy and employment and workplaces. And there's no doubt that this uprising has resulted in an increase in organizing activities. But organizing takes time. And although this uprising is alive, protests are still happening, many groups are organizing, and many of the more isolated groups have been dealing with some level of hopelessness. And the right-wing diaspora opposition, it relies on these feelings among the isolated groups, and in central parts mostly, to push for their own agenda. And they have the same reformist mindset that they should use pressure from below to bring change from above. And their solution is to bring change by negotiating with foreign powers and maybe even trying to make deals with some forces within the current state apparatus. And at the same time, they try to revive a regressive counter-revolutionary discourse that relies on nationalism and appeals to patriarchal power. And today, the civil society and leftist revolutionary forces in Iran are much more aware than they were in 1979 of the ways in which oppressive power is built on top of patriarchal structures. It is, however, imperative for feminists to get more organized to be able to keep alive the radical revolutionary power that has been activated and to resist marginalization and to not allow the right wing to turn their bodies, the bodies of women and queer people to the side of building a new oppressive state. So we in Feminists for Jina define ourselves as a continuation of radical feminist struggle in Iran. And we're not here to give an alternative, but to understand how society is moving forward in Iran and how to stay linked with the feminist struggle inside the country and the discourse there, and to amplify their voice in diaspora. And we organize protests and engage in discourse to show solidarity with our revolutionary siblings in Iran and to spread their voice, and also to not allow a counter-revolutionary movement thrive in the diaspora. And we also seek to strengthen our link to the struggle of revolutionary women in Afghanistan, who have shown unimaginable bravery protesting against the Taliban, receiving almost no tangible support from men in the country, like the experience of Iranian women after the 1979 revolution, only under harsher repression. More broadly, Feminists for Jina tries to contribute to building bridges between the feminist struggle in Iran and other liberation movements in the rest of the world. And to do so, we have to first get past the dominant discourses that reduce struggles to so-called influential figures and celebrities. And we also have to learn how to encounter other movements within their context and from the perspective of people who are participating in it, as opposed to always trying to find the most direct and superficial ways in which it seems to be related to our political map. So for instance, when Western leftists and feminists want to analyze Islamist movements, they should look at them within their own geographical and historical context. And also from the perspective of feminists who are resisting these Islamist movements, and those who always look at the Middle East through the lens of the Western politics, sometimes end up projecting the notion of Islamophobia, which is rooted in Western politics, onto feminist movements rooted in the Middle East, without even bothering to analyze the actual origins of these movements. And once we're able to learn about the other struggles with their own context, then we will be able to find a lot of similarities and links between them, and especially as we witnessed the reemergence of some of the aspects of the Cold War, it is important to form a network of feminist leftist international movements that are not campus, and that invest in organizing and direct action, and also interact with each other and learn from each other.
Thank you, Dorna. That was a lot of great information there. We look forward to hearing more during the discussion. So the film we just saw was made by Masooma Ibrahimi, and she was born in Afghanistan and is a Hazara woman. During her childhood, her family immigrated to Iran because of the Russian war. She finished high school in Iran and returned to Afghanistan in 2003 and started her job as a writer in the newspapers, TVs, and radio about women's rights, children, and violence against women in Afghanistan. She moved to the U.S. August of last year and continues her activities about women, freedom, and justice for Afghanistan women. Please welcome Masooma.
Hello, thank you so much. Just for making correct, this was not a film. It was just a trailer of a short film but you can watch the complete film in the page of Memorial.com. Thank you. Look at me. Look at me very carefully. I am a criminal. Please do not be surprised. I am a criminal who has been constantly punished for years. My punishment and extermination began more than 100 years ago, in 1890, and continued for 10 years thereafter, resulting in 60% of the Hazara being massacred, then buried in the mass graves. Hundreds of thousands of people were forcefully displaced, and their belonging was distributed by the governments of the time. This policy of extermination of the Hazaras were not stopped there. Rather, it became more severe by denying my people from even basic human needs to live or to participate in any social political affairs in the country for many decades to come. Even during the 20 years of international community presence in Afghanistan, the Hazaras were targeted and killed in thousands by the Taliban in every corner of the country. Neither the international community nor the government of Afghanistan tried to stop it or even to recognize it. Nowhere was considered safe for the Hazaras. They were targeted by both Taliban and ISIS in the schools, mosques, hospitals, shrines, sports centers, academic centers, bazaars, and while peacefully protesting. Hazara students, especially female Hazaras, have been the prime target of terrorists. Only in a small locality in the Kabul, more than 1,000 students has been killed over a series of suicide bombing in the last 5 years. The situation of Hazara people has been worse dramatically after the Taliban took over the Afghanistan. Taliban's systematic racist policies against the Hazara had led to mass forced displacement from the village, a total absence of Hazaras from political, social and economic affairs of the society. Various reliable reports suggest that even the international aid is denied reaching the Hazara in many places. So far, the international community has turned a blind eye to all these inhuman policies of the Taliban. I want to ask United Nations, what are you waiting for to recognize this genocide? Should our Hazara people be killed? What you are waiting for, and when will you break your silence? The international community should not treat these lives as just sheer numbers, because we are human and we have the right to live like any other people in the world. The Hazara people of Afghanistan have always been passionate about seeking knowledge, peace, culture, and progress. This value and belief in human dignity, democracy, and freedom, which had been cherished among the Hazara, has led them to be the prime targets of the Taliban and ISIS. You know, my crime is heavier than this word. Besides being a Hazara, I am a woman who is imprisoned today in a big prison called Afghanistan. A woman who has only been allowed to breathe since August 2021, and maybe this right will be taken away from her soon. At first, 13 years old girls were banned from going to school, and then the school doors were closed to all the Afghan girls. After that, girls were banned from university entrance exam, and then university were evacuated from the girls. Women are deprived of social freedom and permission to work in government and non-government offices. In the current economic situation, women and single mothers are struggling with the extreme poverty. In Afghanistan, under the Taliban, women do not have even basic rights like marriage, going outside without mahram, a man. You can add prohibition of sports, arts, economic and cultural activities to these conditions. Can you imagine the situation of women in Afghanistan? Can you put yourself in the shoes of Afghan women? In the face of such a painful condition, women are the only one who advocate for themselves. Women came to the streets with slogan of food, work, education, freedom. Because of raising their voice, they were arrested, subjected to violence, and raped in the Taliban prisons. Although suppressing the protesting women several times, Afghan women continue protest and fighting for their right and freedom. Why do you think there is no man with the protesting women? They are either afraid or have a talent in their mind that prevent them to support women, and this is an unforgivable disaster. Who will hear the voice of Afghanistan women? At what price women will pay for their freedom? Migration, fighting, violence, or accepting captivity? We and many Afghan people in the European and American countries come to the streets to support Afghan women and Hazaras. But the question is, Will there be any change? Will there be any action? Unfortunately, until now, no major action has been taken to condemn the Taliban. Even many countries have considered the Afghan embassy in their country to the Taliban. The situation in Afghanistan is like a sad drama that the world is watching and doing nothing, but shedding tears and condemning the Taliban. The world should know that Taliban are terrorists, murderers, and criminals. No one has the right to consider this small, backward, and primitive group to lead Afghanistan. No one should have the right to play with women's fate in their political games. We fought for freedom, equality, and progress for 20 years. Women were able to participate in different sectors of society. They were active in politics, technology, sports, higher education, art, and economy, and had many achievements. But all these achievements were lost in less than a week, and Afghanistan got back to 20 years ago. Despite all the crime of the Taliban, USA pays millions of dollars to the Taliban every week, and this money is completely used to train, equip, and strengthen the Taliban's suicide forces. And the people of Afghanistan do not benefit from it anyway. Who is the responsible of the situation of Afghanistan? As an Afghan woman, I boldly say that the superpower countries of the East and West and Afghanistan's neighbor are directly responsible for the situation of women in Afghanistan. So they have responsibility to do something. Giving asylum to a few Afghanistan women, journalists, and politicians is not the solution. We want freedom.
Yes.
We want independence. And we want freedom from slavery. The world should know that we Afghan women will never give up. We fight and sacrifice to get freedom, and women's solidarity is the best way to reach out this goal. Today, all the women of the world should be the voice of Afghanistan women, narrate their pain, and support them to create an independent female revolution. Let's dedicate this day to lonely but powerful and strong women of Afghanistan. Ban the Taliban, do not recognize Taliban, stop Hazara genocide, and be the voice of Afghanistan women.
Thank you, Masooma. Good questions, and we'll definitely have more discussion on what the answers are, because we definitely agree. Our next speaker is Helen Gilbert. Helen was born and raised here in Seattle and found her political home in Radical Women, which opened the door to movements for women's liberation and social justice around the whole world. She is the national coordinator of both the U.S. Radical Women and the National Mobilization for Reproductive Justice. As a graphic artist and managing editor of Red Letter Press, she published Clara Fraser's book, Revolution, She Wrote, and most recently, the two new booklets, Which Way Forward for Black Liberation, for the Black Lives Matter movement, and a revolutionary call for Black reparations. And those are available in the bookstore or online at redletterpress.com. Please welcome Helen Gilbert.
Thank you. I really want to thank my incredible panelists here today. It is an honor to have you here in the hall and to hear firsthand about what's happening in your countries. Sometimes I have found we go to a protest and activists from other countries are sort of surprised that U.S. feminists and radicals are there and that we care. But even though we're not there in the midst of the turmoil, these struggles are very close to many of us. First of all, I know I feel a strong responsibility given the horrid role that the U.S. plays in every global struggle, and we need to speak out against it as people in this country. And secondly, the struggles in other countries teach us so much about what we need to know to keep the revolution going here. So I want to bring out some of those lessons that I've learned in my remarks today. So, as Annalisa said, I grew up here in Seattle, and when I was 17 years old, I found Radical Women. And around that time, there were 3 revolutions that happened that have really stuck with me, their spirit and lessons up until now. So, going back to 1973, Salvador Allende, the elected socialist leader of Chile, was assassinated in a right-wing coup aided by the CIA. Allende had tried the impossible task of maintaining capitalism and socialism side by side. As a result, the Chilean capitalists didn't have much to stop them from undermining and overthrowing the government. And Allende refused to arm the workers. He wanted to do it all legally. He wouldn't arm the workers. We also learned recently, in a recent history, that Allende refused to challenge male supremacy by allowing women to come out and publicly stand and participate in the revolution. So the only mass protests that you see about women in the Chilean struggle were counter-revolutionaries. So Allende missed 2 really strong opportunities for defending that revolution. The women arming the workers and not trying to have a middle road. If you're trying to make a revolution, you cannot seek peace with capitalism if you're going to succeed. It was the next year, in 1974, another revolution happened, this time in Europe. Workers in Portugal made a revolution that threw out their fascist dictatorship. Portuguese liberation was back there. This, it's fascinating because the overthrow was initiated by middle-rank army officers who had been fighting a losing, brutal, genocidal 13-year war in the Portuguese colony of Angola. And they refused to fight any longer. The Portuguese Communist Party took up the fight. It broke away from the Stalinist policy of peaceful coexistence with imperialism and led a real revolution that nationalized 60% of the economy. They instituted community councils, and they instituted workers' control in many large industries. And here, the soldiers armed the workers so that they could defend the revolution's gains. As the Portuguese troops deserted en masse, Angola finally won its independence. So Portugal showed me how liberation struggles reach across borders very powerfully. And also by aiming high, the Portuguese workers achieved much. We need to aim high to achieve significant change. Then in 1978 and 79, the Iranian Revolution threw out the Shah, whose prisons and torture chambers were supported by US dollars. This revolution was really inspiring to radical women because the Iranian women were out there in the forefront. It was surprising. Few seemed to realize this except for radical women and our socialist feminist comrades in the Freedom Socialist Party. But Iranian women marched, they went on strike, and they protested. We were especially thrilled that the death blow to the regime was a strike by women bank workers who refused to process government funds. As you might guess, there was attempts to sort of quell the unrest with putting in liberal pro-Western politicians, but they were rejected by the revolutionary movement, and yet no socialist party was able to fill the void. So Ayatollah Khomeini moved in to preserve capitalism and impose a theocracy that declared itself to be anti-imperialist. Many parts of the US and Iranian left hailed Khomeini as embodying a uniquely Iranian form of revolution. But many of the women of Iran were not fooled. In our newspaper, The Freedom Socialist, from 1978, there was an article which reported on the International Women's Day struggle that year. It says, "The women swept into the streets. Their action was a massive and graphic expose of the fundamental contradiction between the new Islamic State and the aspirations of the women, national minorities, and workers of Iran. Hospitals, banks, government offices, libraries, and many companies with large numbers of women workers closed down during the succession of women's marches throughout Iran. Their militant slogans included, 'Those who attack women attack the revolution,' and 'At the dawn of freedom, we have no freedom.' But Khomeini's revolutionary zealots attacked these unveiled women with knives. The lessons of the Iranian Revolution were very clear. In Clara Fraser's words, whose birthday we celebrate this weekend, women are the motor force of revolution, the motor force, or the driving force of revolution in the modern age. And any revolution that claims to be a new way, but maintains capitalism, denies women's humanity, stones LGBTQ people, and crushes national minorities and workers is a counter-revolution. It was outrageous that many progressives could not and still do not grasp that pretty obvious reality. Radical women, Freedom Socialist Party, and Middle Eastern radicals who we worked with here, there weren't a lot, but they were very dedicated. We were all about the only U.S. voices we knew about who were defending Iranian women and denouncing Khomeini. And for this we were slandered as being CIA feminists and insensitive to Iranian culture. In Iran, the left collapsed. Some groups targeted each other, and all were ultimately imprisoned or murdered. In the U.S., political differences among Iranian radicals were also frequently handled with physical attacks instead of political debate. So to me, this was another lesson. A united front is essential, where different parts of the left and social movements can work together on the key issues, but also debate our differences, try to educate each other, win each other over, and maybe we never will, but maybe we can keep from being slaughtered by the counter-revolution. Without a working coalition, a united front, you see political cannibalism and victory of counter-revolution. So we need to find ways to have principled cooperation. To me, looking back, there's a lot of traumas here, but there are also very positive lessons. Past and present, no defeat is permanent. Human beings want to live full lives without repression, poverty, violence, and fear. Courage comes forward and people respond. As Dorna described it, in Iran there was the Green Revolution in 2009 and 10, a national uprising to protest fraudulent elections. And then she talked about the women, the young women who came out on the street corners and tore off their headscarves and waved them like flags in 2017 and 18. And many were brutalized, arrested, thrown in prison, and killed. Now, after the murder of Jina by the morality police, the country has risen up in defense of women and for an end to the theocracy. And we need to keep reminding people the slogan, women, life, freedom, is the Kurdish struggle, the struggle of the oppressed peoples of that region. And I think one of the really wonderful facts that we've seen of the Iranian resistance is real solidarity with all oppressed peoples. As Dorna pointed out, that there is also a desperate need for some kind of coordinating leadership, a leadership that represents the most oppressed and is not, in my opinion, is not deluded about thinking there can be a kind of form of capitalism to replace the theocracy. And I really hope this is the process of forming. I'm sure everyone in Iran is very well aware of this need, because it can't last forever in the streets and in the prisons. We have to have a plan and some coordination nationally. But seeing the unquenchable spirit of the people of Iran fighting back decade after decade after decade gives me great hope that Afghanistan also will free itself from the misogynist and violent Taliban. As we know, it was the U.S. that built up the Taliban and other armies, which it called freedom fighters. And its goal was to push out its Cold War enemy, the USSR. 12 years of repression followed, and then the U.S. invaded Afghanistan after the World Trade Center bombings, claiming it was self-defense against al-Qaeda. When the U.S. just abandoned its 20-year war, it assured the world that the Taliban had changed. But we know how that turned out. Still, there is courageous opposition. For several years, Radical Women's been in touch with a group called Left Radical of Afghanistan. It defends women, workers, and democratic rights. It's now underground, but still alive, and it's put us in touch with a group called Spontaneous Movement of Afghan Women. And they've been sending us updates and photos. They do spray painting in the middle of the night and hold meetings to plan how to support each other. We've posted their messages on the Radical and Facebook and sent their press releases to the media because it's so urgent that the world not turn its back on Afghanistan. Finally, there's the situation here in the United States where things are starting to look a lot like Iran and Afghanistan in some parts of the country, especially for women and oppressed people. We too are in a war to control our bodies, our reproduction and our lives, to defend people shut down and marginalized by their race and ethnicity, to stop terror against queer and trans people, to defend working conditions and end police murder. We're fighting to ensure that all children can thrive and not be drowned in right-wing propaganda in their schools. In the U.S., we still have the advantage that we can organize openly against these setbacks. And it is our duty not to retreat. We owe it to ourselves, but also to the people of the world. In my view and that of Radical Women, our most important task as U.S. feminists and radicals is to make a socialist revolution here, in the very heartland of imperialism. We have to get the U.S. boot off the necks of the people of the world. We have to aim towards socialism and not be fooled into thinking that revolution, that liberation is possible under some minor form of capitalism. Capitalism always goes back to its roots as an exploitative and misogynist system. Even if we can't win socialism in the U.S. or the Middle East right now, we need to be truthful about the innately repressive character of capitalism. And as we fight the rollbacks, we must build the coalitions and united fronts that can defend our rights and defeat rising fascism in this country. Working class feminists with the clear-eyed leadership of gender-oppressed people of color are in a unique position to build the trust and collaboration that can create the short but good revolution that Clara Fraser liked to talk about. To celebrate International Women's Day and the centennial of Clara Fraser's birth, I urge you all to join with Radical Women and our co-fighters in Iran and Afghanistan to make a world that upholds woman, life, freedom.
Thank you, Helen. And before we start the discussion, I'd like to invite Anna Cunningham to come out. Anna is a high radical teacher and a radical women member who will share how you can contribute to radical women.
One minute, guys. Hi, guys. Okay, so my name is Anna Cunningham, and good Lord, sorry. I'm a proud new member of Radical Women. Woo! I'm here today to ask you to please pledge your support and make a donation to our chapter of Radical Women. For this Women's History Month, Radical Women is seeking to raise enough money to sustain us through the year while we continue fighting for international and intersectional feminism. As you know, International Women's Day is a working-class radical holiday that honors feminist fighters. Our panel is a perfect example of that. The incredible bravery of women around the globe fighting against repression and for full liberation. We want to not only keep educating ourselves with events like this, but also keep connecting with activists to build a powerful worldwide feminist force. With your donations, Radical Women can do just that. For example, a $100 donation would buy a printer cartridge to keep printing leaflets. $50 helps us to order books for our study group. $20 pledge would pay for 1 hour of RW staff time. $5 would pay for several picket signs for a protest. And if you're wondering how you can do this, you can do it by cash or check, or we have a nifty QR code. And if you don't know how to use a QR code, that's okay. I didn't know until like about a year ago. So you take your phone and then you point it at the little QR code right here, and then you click on the link, and then you can donate. All right. And then I think some people will be passing that out right now. So yes. Okay. So why are we fundraising during this month specifically? Well, for one, Women's History Month means different things to different people. It represents women of all races, ones that live here and overseas, those who have given their lives for the rights for future generations, trans women, imprisoned women, and disabled women. Yes! For us at Radical Women, our fight is for these women, and for those who are experiencing any level of inequality or discrimination. At my job, I teach 6th through 12th graders who are each a part of various vulnerable populations, such as, but not limited to, LGBTQ+ communities, those who struggle with mental illness, general trauma, and or find themselves somewhere on the autism spectrum. The kids who I work with in the past and the present have experienced a great deal of trauma and adversity. For me, these kids are a huge reason why I have allied myself with Radical Women. They're my little babies. Or I call them my little ducklings. But the thing is, children who I work with go back out into the world after leaving school, and they live within the same systems that put them in the vulnerable position that they're in the first place. That is why advocating for them outside of work is incredibly important for me. With Radical Women, I can rest easy at night knowing that half of the work of being a holistic social worker is being done, and that there is a chance of my students not having to grow up and work for greedy corporate bastards for the majority of their lives. Woo! So that is why during this Women's History Month, I implore you to think about the people at RW who are doing the heavy lifting and to consider donating towards their efforts. And I know I'm going off script, but I grew up in Oklahoma, and I just want to say that places like this, like RW and Freedom Socialist Party, are a gift. Like, I know all the people in here are probably on the same page about most things, but things like this just don't exist in the Midwest and a lot of parts of the country. So that's why this place just means so much to me. So that's why I'm happy. But anyway, To wrap up this conversation as a special treat, I'd love to share with you what my students think of Women's History Month and what it means to them. So my question was, why is Women's History Month important to celebrate? A 10th grader answered, because women slay. And then a 12th grader answered, this month is important because sometimes men think that women can't do jobs like being a doctor. My question was, how do you celebrate Women's History Month? And then a 10th grader answered, by making boys do things for me that I don't want to do. Chef's kiss. And then another 12th grader answered, by being mindful of women and all of the things that they've done for me and my future. That's it.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you all so much for your donations. We really, really appreciate it, and there's still time to give, at the very end.